Hello everyone! I hope you all had an excellent weekend and you're ready to continue the coverage of the 2013 Candidates Tournament. It's a game from round 7, Magnus Carlsen versus Teimour Radjabov. Carlsen is still in the lead with Levon Aronian, and Radjabov definitely, wants to say something about that. And it's very interesting, as I've said in my previous video, the players are playing 3 rounds, then there's a rest day, then 3 rounds, then the rest day, then the 3 rounds, then there's a rest day. And as this is round 7, there was a rest day after round 6. So as it usually is in tournaments, after players, really get rested, then either you will see fireworks on all of the boards, or you will see a very slow day. Players are, even though they came here to play chess, they enjoyed resting so much that they are resting when they should, be playing some good chess. So it's who knows which of these scenarios happened in round 7. To figure that out, we have to check out some games. And before we see the game, we do have some photos of this round. So here we have a photo of Carlsen versus Radjabov. As you can see, the situation is very intense even before the first move was even made. Here another photo from a different perspective. Also, you can see that the players are very focused. Carlsen is staring at the board. It's like he doesn't know what move he will make. And the players played a very interesting variation, and the entire game is very interesting. So let's check it out. Carlsen opens with e4. We have c5, the Sicilian defense, knight to f3, knight to c6, and now comes bishop to b5, the Rossolimo attack, sometimes called the Nezhmetdinov-Rossolimo attack, as Rashid Nezhmetdinov did use this quite often against the knight c6 Sicilian, and he produced some brilliant victories in this line. And it's very interesting. We do have a photo of this moment when bishop to b5 was played, and it's very interesting. Here you can see Carlsen making the bishop to b5 move, and for some reason Radjabov already has his hand in the air. It's like he knows what move he's going to make next, and he wants to show Carlsen that he is definitely prepared for the bishop to b5 variation, or it could be that he's just immediately going for his pen to write down Carlsen's move. So a very interesting turn of events. So after bishop to b5, we have e6. Bishop captures on c6, b captures on c6, and here Carlsen goes for b3. So black's pawn structure is somewhat crippled. Carlsen plays b3. He's ready to develop the bishop on b2. The b3 pawn will nullify the rook's influence on the b file, and it's a pretty standard trade-off. White's pawn structure is somewhat better, but black does have the bishop pair, so whatever you prefer. We have d6 and castles, knight to e7 and the immediate e5. And here you could push something like d5, and black does have a strong center, but this e5 pawn white has is very annoying. It really has a lot of influence on black's position. So after e5, knight to g6, piling up on the e5 pawn, and here Carlsen captures. E captures on d6, bishop captures, and knight to c3. We have e5. For the moment, kind of blocking his own bishop on d6, but he does want to activate the light square bishop. Rook to e1, we have castles, and now comes d3. And Radjabov goes for f5. It's very interesting, maybe for those of you who are maybe new to chess, because this is something I encounter quite often when playing against newer players. A move like bishop to g4 is something you don't want to do before actually thinking about it, as there is a knight on g6. It doesn't matter if it's a knight or anything else, or even if it's a pawn on g6. Some players do play this move, and then after you play h3, they didn't really think what they will do with the bishop. So now you kind of have to move it back. You can't go here because then g4 will trap it, and you either have to trade it or you want to just go back. So if this is the situation, you don't want to play a move like that unless you really want to trade this bishop for a knight. So just putting it out there. So f5 by Radjabov, bishop to a3, as the c5 and the c6 pawns are somewhat weak. Carlsen will place his pieces on ideal squares to attack those weaknesses. Bishop to e6, now comes knight to a4, piling up on the c5 pawn, queen to e7 defending, and now c4, locking down those pawns. Rook 8 to d8, we have queen to e2, bishop to c8, now transferring the bishop all the way to the queen side, and now comes queen to e3. queen to e3 is a very forward way of dealing with things. Now Carlsen has a triple attack on the c5 pawn, and he's basically forcing Radjabov to push f4 to move the queen away from here. And this is exactly what Radjabov plays. But there was a very interesting variation here. As the c5 pawn is, I mean, those double pawns aren't really doing all that much, and they're not really going to be useful in the end game. So how about maybe you can give up some of those pawns to increase your activity on the king side, as you do have two very nice bishops. If you can somehow push those pawns, activate the bishops, and bring the queen there, it could get very ugly for white. So what about a move like knight to h4? Knight to h4 is a very interesting move. For example, now black is seemingly giving up the e5 pawn, but if you capture this, then you get knight captures on g2. It's a very unpleasant move for white. You're attacking his rook on e1 and queen on e3. So after king captures, now you push f4. And now the queen still has to defend the knight, as the knight is attacked by both the bishop and the queen. So after queen e4, bishop to f5, you kick away the queen, queen e2, and now comes queen to h4. And white is up a piece, but black has a very, very nasty attack. f3, now comes bishop captures, and after queen captures, it's bishop to h3, and white is completely lost here. King g1, and now rook to d8. There's no defense. If you move the queen, rook captures on d1. Both the rook and the queen are attacking the rook. So you either have to give up the queen here, or you're just losing the game. So a very interesting variation, but unfortunately after knight here, you don't have to, white doesn't have to capture on e5, of course. He can simply capture, and then after queen captures, it would be a very double-edged position. Still, white still has play here on the queen side. He can start gobbling up those pawns, but black will be able to start pushing here and maybe create some activity. But as interesting as it is, Radjabov goes for f4, immediately counters this threat of c5 pawn being attacked. We have queen to e4, and now comes king to h8. And now rook 8 to d1 by Carlsen. Here Carlsen says that he did think about h3, but then he saw that rook to f5 wasn't really possible, but Radjabov thought that rook to f5 was possible. This is something they discussed in an interview after the game. What Carlsen saw on rook to f5, if you wanted to transfer the rook also into the attack, Carlsen saw d4 here. And now if c-pawn captures, then you can exchange here, and then the e5 pawn becomes weak. Or if you play e captures here, then Carlsen saw queen captures, rook on f5. Bishop captures and rook captures queen. Captures, and then after captures, it would be a pretty equal ending, where black would have a bishop against a knight, and it's very hard to say would those pawns here be an advantage or a weakness for black. But he didn't really think too much about it, so he played rook 8 to d1. Bishop to g4, we have rook to d2, and now comes bishop captures on f3, queen captures, and knight to h4. So a very nice attack by Radjabov on the king side. Queen to e4, and now comes f3. And Carlsen saw all of this, and he prepared something very nice for Radjabov. G3, attacking the knight, knight to g2, and now as the rook on e1 is attacked, Carlsen ignores this, and he plays knight to c3, preparing to activate his pieces again. And Carlsen's idea is that he has a very nice setup here on the queen side, as black does have these nasty doubled pawns. Even if he gives up the exchange, his rook isn't all that useful, and this knight is a monster knight, so he doesn't mind trading this. Queen to e6. First, Radjabov first tries to improve the position, and now comes rook to e3. Instead of rook to e3, Radjabov says that he did consider something like king to h1, and this kind of reminds me of the time Mikhail Tal hallucinated in his game against Botvinnik. Then Radjabov says he saw queen to h3, and after rook to g1, he thought that maybe Carlsen would want to give up the exchange this way to get rid of this knight, but then he saw that after rook f6, he prepares to bring the rook into the game. Then he thought, what about rook captures on g2, and then if pawn captures, then queen will capture, but then he saw, oh, wait a minute, queen captures on g2 is checkmate. So that was kind of funny when he said that in an interview, and he said, yeah, I mean, even at this level, players can overlook a mate in one. If you're interested in watching the entire interview after the game, I will put a link to the article in the description below, as we do have it after every round, so be sure to check it out. Rook to e3 by Carlsen, now piling up on that f3 pawn, and now he forces Radjabov to capture the rook. So knight captures, we have pawn captures, and here is kind of the critical moment in the game. Here there's a lot of things to calculate, and it's only move 25, so you're not even close to reaching time control. You still have to make 15 moves. And here the best idea how to continue this attack is something like bishop to e7. Bishop to e7, activate your rooks, maybe go h5, bring the rook into the game, and just try and increase pressure. The reason Radjabov decided not to do something like this, he didn't like this knight to d1 to f2 idea. And the knight from f2 is preventing the queen from coming to h3, and also the knight from f2 is blocking this f pawn. So instead, after this f captures on e3, Radjabov played the immediate f2 check. So he decided to sacrifice this pawn to open up lines of attack. He says he didn't really calculate it all the way to the end, but he thought, this surely must be winning in some way. So capturing the pawn is forced. Rook captures, we have rook captures, king captures, and now rook to f8. And it's a very nice position for you to analyze. You're white. How do you defend here? Black just played rook to f8 check. So what do you do here? Feel free to pause, even briefly, and decide: do you go back to the king side or do you go to the queen side? So for those of you who decided to go to the king side, you would not have too much fun this game. For example, if king g2, then comes queen to f7, and there's really no good way for you to defend queen to f1 checkmate. You'd have to run away, and then after queen f1 check, queen blocks. Queen comes here, king comes up, and then bishop to e7. This will be checkmate, and any other variations aren't all that pleasing for white. So for those of you who went king to e2, congratulations, you are an excellent defender. So king to e2, this was played in the game by Carlsen. Queen to h3, threatening to capture the h2 pawn, and again this pretty much forces queen to h1. There's no other good move here. Carlsen plays queen to h1, and now comes bishop to e7. Bishop to e7, he wants to activate his bishop, maybe bring it over to g5 to maybe create some chances here. An interesting move that the engine prefers is rook to f6. Rook to f6 with the simple idea rook h6 and start grabbing a pawn here. Maybe grab on h2 and then maybe even force this knight to stay on c3 to defend the a2 pawn. But Radjabov doesn't go for this. He goes bishop to e7, and now comes knight to e4. Knight to e4, a beautiful place for the knight, guarding g5, also pressuring c5, and unless Radjabov can make use of this rook on f8, it really doesn't matter. He's up the exchange. Queen to g4 check. We have king to d2, and now queen back to h3. Radjabov is threatening rook to f1 to trap Carlsen's queen on h1. So Carlsen simply repeats king to e2. Radjabov goes h5. Maybe he can break through on the king side. Bishop to b2, and now there is a threat of bishop captures on e5. This would be good for white. So again, queen to g4 check, king to d2, and queen back to h3. Again, you can't capture, of course, because then rook to f1 would trap the queen. So again, king to e2 is repeated. We have king to g4 check, king d2, and queen back to h3. So this is move 36, and here, after a threefold repetition, Carlsen and Radjabov played it out to a draw. So a very exciting game, and another game where Carlsen really had to play very precisely, and he calculated precisely that giving up the exchange will not matter all that much in this position, because the rook simply can't get any play, and the bishop and the knight are somewhat more active. So a very nice game by both of them, a very nice attack by Teimour Radjabov, and a very nice defense by Magnus Carlsen. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Another lovely game from the 2013 Candidates Tournament. We will not talk about the standings, as we will show more games from round 7. But as usual, you can check out more photos from round 7 in the description below. There will be some nice links, and do check out an article by Peter Dodgers about round 7. And I would like to thank Jan Weller, Peter Dannenberg, Jason D. Klinger, Nicholas Ziebert, and Farhad Ahmed for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. Farhad Ahmed actually donated money he won in a chess tournament in his university, and it's the first chess tournament that he ever participated in. So if that's your way of saying that my channel is, to some degree responsible for you winning this tournament, that makes me extremely happy. So thank you very much. So yeah, as usual, you can check all my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with another video from round 7 of the 2013 Candidates Tournament. Thank you all.